Afternoon, everyone. Happy Friday. We're back on Ed Miliband again. Back on energy prices. Now, I've said that in terms of the things that Labour really need to do, to accomplish, if you were to sort of write down a list of several things that if Labour could do these, then be in really good shape. Like we've seen lots of polling, very recent polling, saying there's massive chunks of people who at the moment say they'd support Reform UK, who say they will absolutely vote for Labour if certain things are achieved. One of them is the cost of living. So what are the big pressures on the cost of living? Well, the two big pressures right now, according to the Bank of England, are food prices and energy prices. Those are the two things keeping inflation high. And energy is something where like Ed Miliband's department, which is energy security and net zero, are working on ways to because naturally the bills will come down anyway as you transition to renewable energy, despite what the likes of Nigel Farage will say, renewable energy is just cheaper. It's massively cheaper. In fact, it's way cheaper to produce the same amount of energy from solar and wind as it costs from like the fossil fuel power stations we still have. But this all takes time, and Labour really needs some bills to come down ASAP. You might have imagined before the next election, and there's a certain extent to which normal political wisdom says that if the government, see, I'm in two minds about this. So strategically, if the government can knock off money off energy bills, is it better to do it now, or is it better to do it a year before the election? Not right before the election, that looks a bit too cynical, but say a year before the election, so it's still fresh in people's minds, but you know, you did it far enough out. There's a sense in which it can make sense to make sure you deliver the most visible improvements close to the election. However, at the moment, they want to avoid Reform UK maintaining the momentum they have at the moment. Labour really should never have been comfortable being behind Reform UK at all in the polls, and they certainly can't be, and I suspect they're not comfortable with the idea of remaining behind them in the polls even for another couple of years, right? They really should be on a mission to get them down. But energy is a really crucial one. If you can knock off a significant amount of money off people's energy bills, inflation comes right down. So there's been a press release today, which I'll just go over quickly, but I'm going to come back to it because I want to talk about, you know, something else in general. So this is, I'll just read it out as it is. It says people living near pylons to get £2,500 off electricity bills over 10 years as smart meter plans are unveiled to give consumers better rights and compensation. So there's two key things here. First of all, pylons, obvious. If you're going to massively expand energy capacity, which we need to literally double our energy capacity to take account of things like increased use of electric vehicles, as well as data centers, you know, feeding the hungry AI machine. So we need to not just replace unclean, insecure sources of energy with cleaner, more secure ones. We need to massively increase the amount of electricity we produce, because we're going to be massively increasing the amount of electricity we consume. And so that means building more, expanding the network that delivers the electricity as well. Pylons. People don't like pylons, right? People don't like pylons. So what Labour have done here is provide a financial incentive, and Reform UK are of course hopping mad about it, because what it would mean is, because you'll get, because where they control councils, they're trying to block these moves. Now the central government can ram them through, but there can be delays. It can take longer, right? Brad saying, is someone not bothered by pylons? It would be a win-win. Yeah, I mean, I'm not bothered by the sight of pylons. But nonetheless, it's very obvious there is no realistic way around it. We're going to need more pylons. but you also want to make sure you've got local support for it. Now, although the country is broadly supportive of cleaner, more secure energy, like there's a clear majority, even a majority of Reform UK voters still want the net zero and all the rest of it. What you can often find is what is broadly popular across the country can still run into two problems. First of all, Nimbysm, straightforward Nimbysm. Oh yeah, we totally need this thing, absolutely, just not in my backyard. And the second problem is sometimes, you know, if this is the case of who are the most supportive of these moves, if it's people in like cities and things, but that's not where the pylons are mostly going, then, you know, there's an extent to which you need the communities who are going to need to be part of it to be on side as well. And are they? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. I'm not seeing specific polling on that. So what do? You offer financial incentives. I mean, it's a bit funny. I used to sort of say, you know, so the first time I ever came across Nimbysm was with mobile phones, masts specifically. And you'd get people complaining about mobile phone masts. I would say to them, do you have a mobile phone? They go, yeah. Well, how do you expect it to work without a mast? But you can say the same thing. You know, there was a Richard Tice getting involved in an anti-solar demonstration this week, wasn't it? And you just want to say to these people, should we cut off your houses then from the national grid? Because the thing that gets me about the people, they want the electricity. I could get it. If these were people who just wanted to live in a log cabin in the woods, right? I would go, well, do you know what? The majority of us want the pylons. We want the electricity. But I would totally appreciate their position. If they were saying, actually, I live without electricity, so I don't want the electric infrastructure, I would still say, well, society does want it, so tough. But I would at least have some respect for their position, right? But these are people who use electricity. So these are people who need power stations and other forms of power generation. They need the power generation to exist somewhere, and they need the pylons to carry it to them. They need all of that infrastructure. If you were to say, I tell you what, should we just get rid of electricity in the country? They wouldn't like that. They wouldn't enjoy that. They wouldn't go for that. They wouldn't support that. So NIMBYism. Anyway, back to the point. The point is financial incentives. So the idea is, this is how it reads. I'll tell you the thing that puts me off about the press release though, when it keeps talking about £2,500 off your bills over 10 years, because I'm thinking to myself, why are you phrasing it like that? There's two possibilities. The first is, it's the usual political trick, £2,500, because that's £250 a year, right? £2,500 sounds like a bigger amount of money than £250. So is it just that? Or is it that the idea it will ramp up? So it's not going to be 200, even though this scheme will apply from next year, it won't be £250 off bills next year, but ramping up, because it does say here, the plans could see, there's lots of qualifiers here. The plans could see eligible households save up to £250 off their electricity bill a year. The idea is you receive it in 2 6-month instalments. So £125 discount off your energy bill. So it's not money in the bank. It's knocked off your energy bill. So this will be done through energy companies, by the sounds of it, every 6 months for living near this infrastructure. So that way you can see the way this is intended to work. If you've got a local area, particularly where Reform UK, or Conservatives maybe, but Reform UK are trying to block the development of energy infrastructure, this will be the government trying to get local people on side by going, well, if they block it, then your energy is literally £250 a year more expensive than it needs to be. Because the people who will have the say at the council level, the householders, will be the ones where they're going to be close by to it. And if the government are saying, if you go ahead with it, it's £250 a year off your energy bill. It's as simple as that, or up to £250. They may I don't know whether this up to £250 is because it won't be that much next year. It'll be an average of £250 a year over the next 10 years, so it ramps up. Or because they want to adjust the values according to different parts of the country. Maybe. Because it'll have to be paid for somehow. Remember, eventually it'll be paid for really easily because energy will naturally be cheaper. But in the here and now, if they're going to start this next year, the money's going to have to come from somewhere. We don't get those savings immediately, but we need to push out the money immediately. So maybe they're just trying to penny pinch a little bit. David, they say, I don't like pylons. I know putting the cables underground is more expensive, but a lot easier to get around the Nimbys. But it's not though, David. Not only is it, yes, way more expensive. The example I always use, right, because I had this in my local area. So where I live, I'm sort of between Doncaster and Scunthorpe, two large towns. So I tend to go into Scunthorpe. You know, it's where my gaming club is, but also where I tend to go shopping. So a few months ago, they were doing some work on the cables. And it's over a motorway. So it's over the motorway that I travel down. And all I knew about this work on it was there was a net underneath the cables because they were doing all the work at night, right? But this work was still ongoing for a long time. If those cables had been underground, how do you maintain them or repair them without shutting off the motorway day and night until the work is done? That is your problem. You can do work on overhead cables without shutting major and this stretch of motorway, by the way, is a major trade route. It connects all the ports in the sort of East Midlands, North East Midlands. So like Hull, Immingham, Grimsby, all these docks, all connected by this stretch of motorway. So you've got lorries flying up and down there all the time. Not as much as before Brexit, I'd noticed. Because I've travelled down that motorway a lot over the last 20 years. But nonetheless, you've got loads of lorries. You can't shut that off. You can't shut it off during the day. So it's completely, this idea of underground cables, in some areas it can be logistically possible, but it is hideously expensive. But in some areas, it's not realistic at all. You need it overhead. Can't be shutting motorways down. John, they say, if people object to pylons, they can buy generators that use expensive diesel. David saying, you say that a local man's been running his business from a generator on a combination of kerosene, red diesel, vegetable oil and used car oil. That's fine. If people want to do that, no problem. Again, like I say, if someone wants to protest against it, if they live without the national grid, I'm still going to say, but we live in society, and that means to an extent we have to accept society's rules, right? We have to accept society's rules. One of the reasons why even the last Labour government, I always said that there's certain policies they had that I just thought were bad policies, but politically you understood them. It's the same with now. There are some bad policies they have that are not, I think, are not strategic at all. But like when it comes to immigration, society now, not just in Britain but across lots of countries in Europe, are saying they're more anti-immigration. So I sort of accept that we're going to have some bad policies on immigration because you can't just tell society no to things. But this is the same thing. Society wants the national grid. It doesn't want to live in a log cabin with its own generator. Society wants a national grid, so that's my argument to those people. But if they themselves do without the national grid, I'll at least say, but I respect your position. You are at least living as you expect others to live. Whereas when you've got people protesting against pylons and they themselves are connected to the national grid and using it, because no one forces you to use it, then you don't even have to be connected. You can have your house disconnected. That's legal. But if they don't, then they're hypocrites because they want the infrastructure. They just want other people to have what they think is the burden of it. Not that I think a pylon is a particular burden. But the point is, anyway, so one of the points I wanted to make was So this is quite good because it will be then in the news that people are saving on their energy bills. There's a significant chunk of money come off the energy bills. Hopefully it will also work on the very communities that Reform UK is trying to mobilise against net zero. Hopefully it will do that. We will have to wait and see, because there's a certain extent to this where you think, oh, Labour's comms is going to have to be better, isn't it? But this alone won't do enough at the next election, because some of the community, a lot of the communities, quite frankly, that Labour will be fighting Reform UK over are not going to be the sort of areas that will be benefiting from this. Because you're talking here largely rural areas, let's be honest, aren't you? You're talking small towns, largely rural and semi-rural areas are the sort of places I live, but not necessarily a lot of the key battlegrounds. Some of them, yeah, but not a lot. So what you really need is money off energy bills at the next election for, I mean, ideally across the country, but if you can't do that, at least, because the thing that will come back is the £300 off. Labour said, you know, our plans will knock £300 off your energy bills. Now, granted, their plans are over 10 years, but when you promise a thing, people sort of want to judge it at the next election. You can't set your own timetable. The voters will decide their own timetable. Now, this is why I'm a bit disappointed. I think I'll probably get it politically, but I am a bit disappointed that Downing Street decided to veto the idea of zonal pricing, because I'm a support. I see there are drawbacks to it. There are political drawbacks, and possibly those political drawbacks were too much. But I was a big supporter of that because it would cut the feet from under Reform UK. The idea of zonal pricing was going to be that you split the country into regions, big regions, not the regions we have now, big regions. There are only going to be like 6 or 7 of them, I think. Split them into big regions, and then regions that produce way more electricity than they generate, they get a discount, because they are effectively, it's like imagining different parts of Britain as being energy importers or exporters. So if you're a big energy exporter, you get money off your own energy bills because you are producing a massive surplus. So that would have been straight away money off energy bills in Scotland and the north of England, where there's going to be, there are going to be key Labour Reform UK battlegrounds there. It would have, however, meant energy price increases in the southeast of England, where you've got a lot of people not producing as much electricity, so they're net importers effectively. And I think that was probably why, but it's a shame, because that would have solved the problem immediately. It's something you could have had set up for the next election. But I do think where Labour, if you think about a lot of the deprived areas, these old industrial towns, mining towns, coastal towns, all these old industrial areas that are suffering because manufacturing has been on the decline, and they haven't necessarily boosted their own economies with the growth in service economy, for example. A lot of these old knackered towns. And you get them all over the north of England, bits of Scotland, bits of North Wales, bits of North Midlands. And, if you think about what needs to happen, we know from polling, so immigration, Labour have to do something on it, but Labour will never compete with Reform UK on immigration. So there's a sense in which I think Labour, they have to do something, but they shouldn't be making it their big megaphone issue, because it's not helping them. The second thing is improved public services at the local level. So their plan for the Sure Start centres, or Best Start centres, whatever they're called, and local health community centres, that will be a big win. That will be a big win on local services. But then the other thing that polling tells us is cost of living. And the two pressures on cost of living are food, which Labour can't do that much about, really. I mean, trying to improve trade with the EU is going to help. But that just limits the damage. It doesn't actually reduce the prices. But energy is something they can reduce the prices of, and it's a, you know, it's a big source of someone's, particular people on a low income. It's a big chunk that you can do something about. Like, obviously the biggest chunk is accommodation costs, housing costs. Well, Labour are trying on that, but that's not something they can change for the next election. But they can for energy prices. Anyway, I'll go through some more comments. Back in the day, Nikola Tesla had a plan to conduct electricity wirelessly around the world. Never came to pass though. No, we did this when I was at university. Actually, it's quite an interesting idea. I imagine one of the it's maybe something that could, I don't know whether it would work these days. I imagined at the time the reason why it wouldn't have worked 100 years ago was because of, apart from anything else, charging for electricity. Because to collect, all it would do, by the way, this would just involve electricity effectively passing through the country on radio waves, and you'd have a collector which would then convert that electromagnetic energy into electrical energy. So then the question is, how do you bill for it? Because all someone needs is a collector, and they can have all the electricity they want. Now, these days, I mean, you could license it. Maybe you could, you know, stop people being able to have unauthorized ones. And you know, part of it, by law, you have to have a meter to record it. But at the time, I imagined the technology would have allowed for the transmission of electricity this way. Although I'm not sure how efficient it would be, by the way. It may not be as efficient. But the key problem, I think, would have been, how do you know how much someone's used? So the only way to have made it work would have been socialism, basically. You would have needed a situation where the government provides the electricity and charges people a proportion of something, their property value or their own net worth or whatever, some tax to pay for it. But you couldn't have that tax proportional to use, because you wouldn't be able to prove how much they'd used. But yes, I mean, we learned about this at university. Again, there's multiple problems potentially with it. Frank, they say, how for all in Germany, the cost for energy cables from the north to the south, overground €3 billion, underground the cost is €10 billion. Yeah, we know it is more expensive. It's not just that it's more expensive to set them up, but you've got a huge economic cost with digging up roads and things like that, and closing off roads and other transport links while you lay them. And also because, I mean, you can't dig up a train line. So there's some transport links you wouldn't be able to dig up at all. So yeah, I mean, there's it really is a non-starter, this idea of underground cables. It creates way more. It's not just the cost is prohibitive itself, but it's not just the cost. It creates way more problems, and it really solves not. Like, what's the problem it solves? Really, Nimbysm. Well, there's ways to deal with Nimbysm. The southeast is also the sunniest, so this could have incentivized more solar there. I mean, solar should be really everywhere. Everywhere where you've got the sun hitting a surface where that surface, you know, it's like, imagine a surface where the sun's going to be on it a fair amount. I mean, obviously not, it depends, it needs to sort of be roughly south facing. But imagine a surface and think to yourself, if I put a solar panel on that surface, does it prevent that surface doing its job? And if the answer is no, then yeah. So you don't put it on a skylight, obviously. But, you know, if you've got a roof or a covered walkway, you know, sometimes in like supermarket car parks, there's the Tesco in Grimsby, for example, has in the car park, it's got a covered walkway when it's raining. It rains a lot there. Actually, it doesn't rain that much. I'm not sure why they've got it there, but they've got it there. I mean, why doesn't it have solar? I mean, maybe it does. I've not been there for a few years, but certainly at the time. Something like that, solar panels. Where you've got motorways, central reservation. Over the central reservation, just have solar panels. all the way along the central reservation. Why wouldn't you? You know, you sometimes do see some solar panels, like, you know, an isolated solar panel post, or a small wind turbine at the side of motorways. Not very often. You do sometimes see them powering a motorway sign. And you just think, well, why don't we just collect it all? Why don't we just have them everywhere? Business Cat there saying you can do power transfer via microwave towers. Yeah, don't know what the power loss is compared to ours. No, that's what I say. I don't actually know if it's as efficient, in all honesty. Cover the car park as well. Maybe, but you could certainly, again, it depends on cost, doesn't it? But you can certainly put them there. Why do you think you don't see many panels near the M1 in southern England? Well, I don't go there very often, but again, this will be Nimbysm, really. I mean, why don't we have energy being generated close by to where it's being consumed? Because that's efficient. You know, there is energy loss on the transfer of energy from the power station to where it's ultimately being used. Most people live in the southeast of England. It's the highest population density of all the regions in the country, isn't it? So why isn't that also our highest energy production density part of the country? Because it's where most people live, and most people didn't want the infrastructure, and it's where most of the votes are, and so they just loaded it up where there weren't as many people to complain. So Scotland chiefly, parts of the north of England produces quite a lot. On the subject of trains, the new air-conditioned Piccadilly line tube are ready to be released into the wild from now or December. Well, do I use the Piccadilly? I'm trying to remember now which line I use, because the rejoin march is this October, towards the end of October. I seem to remember, do I use the Piccadilly line to get from King's Cross to Westminster? I might do. So maybe I'll be seeing this. I absolutely hate the tube. I mean, it's one of these things. It's a really good transport system. I totally appreciate the fact you can get around London really easily. But it's very stressful. Admittedly, October not as bad as summer. But it would be nice, yes, if it's made a little bit more comfortable, if that is indeed the line I'm using. Business Cat, yes. The reason the voltage ramped up so high is because that's the way to lose least power. Yes, absolutely. Because as I'm sure you all remember from your schooling, it's the energy loss is via heat, and that is proportional to current. So because power is voltage times current, if you want to maintain a certain amount of power but a very low amount of current, you need a very high amount of voltage. So you whack up the voltage, which maintains the power without, but with a very low current, effectively. So yes, I'm sure you will remember that from school. Ironic they complain about pylons, but not that giant grey motorway. Well, some people do that as well, but yes. People do complain about like bypasses, for example. Because even though the aim of them is to, you know, ease congestion. France mandated solar in parkings over certain numbers of cars. That's a good idea. You know, there'll be scope for more of this as time goes on as well. Because I'm sure what will happen in the UK is, so the government, obviously it's low-hanging fruit. So they're going to massively increase the amount of wind and solar in particular that we're using. Yes, there's also plans for nuclear. But there'll come a point where you get diminishing returns from it, and then we'll have to look at other ways of increasing it. Because do you know what? Solar is a ridiculously untapped resource. Solar panels are becoming ever more efficient. They were efficient enough 20 years ago when Labour were starting to sort of incentivise people having them on their houses. They were efficient enough then. They're way more efficient now. And they're getting more efficient. Like I keep saying, in terms of technology for burning fossil fuels and turning it into energy, we're pretty much done. There isn't a lot of efficiency to be developed in terms of burning things and turning it into energy, whereas there is for solar and wind, particularly solar. But there we go. Di there saying, which is why we use AC, easier to swap INV using transformers. Yes, it's quite interesting because there was at one time a big, I mean, as you can imagine, when, you know, electricity was being rolled out across entire nations, like America, UK, and so on. There were, as you can imagine, debates about, because you can imagine, you look at what we do now and you think, well, that's just the way to do it. Actually, no, there's always different ways to do it. And there were real discussions about how to do it. And there were people, I can't remember the names of who was on which side now, if I'm honest. But there were people who wanted us to use DC. AC won out in the end, of course, that's what we use. But yeah, there were people who wanted to use DC. I think for safety purposes. But in terms of efficiency, AC is better. Solar doesn't need to be restricted to south facing. There are panels that work without direct sunlight, not as efficient. No, indeed. But what I'm saying is where you have a suitable surface, there should really, the question should be asked, why isn't there a solar panel on it? Why isn't there a solar panel on it? And there will be the odd reason, but mostly it won't be a good one. Edison was pro-DC, was it? I thought he was, but I couldn't quite remember. Again, I knew all about this like 20, 30 years ago when I was learning about it at university. Can we harness energy from Boris Johnson's hot air? Well, he doesn't produce as much these days. We don't hear much from him. He's shacked away with Carrie, producing ever more offspring in his mansion, isn't he? Doesn't seem to do more. I assume he's still going around America doing speeches, getting loads of money. But we don't. It's not really newsworthy these days, is he? Business cat there. Edison electrocuted an elephant to death to scare the public on AC. Did he just give people the idea of how to kill people then? Because that's what they use in America, isn't it? Or they did do in America for a while. Oh, Business Cat actually just saying the electric chair was another product of this, yes. But anyway, there we go. Edison, he was an arsehole though, Edison, wasn't he? He was an absolute arsehole. But Tesla was a much better engineer. Edison was just a better businessman, really. Tesla was the better. Who was his employee for a while. But when Tesla struck out on his own, Edison succeeded and Tesla failed because Tesla wasn't as good at business. It's quite an interesting story about how he made Mark Twain shit himself. Nikola Tesla. It's quite an interesting story. You'll have to look. That's your homework. You can look that one up. How he got Mark Twain to shit himself, literally. On purpose as well. Well, it was sort of semi on purpose. But there we go. We'll leave it there. Thanks very much for coming on, everyone. I'm popping over to Politics Social in half an hour now. Have a great rest of Friday. And until next time, I'll see you later.